The FBI just issued a warning, but what's interesting is not the warning itself, it's the timing, because this comes at a moment when multiple things are quietly happening across the US, and people are starting to ask questions. But if you've been paying attention even a little, you might have noticed something subtle shifting in the background. And now, the FBI has stepped in with a warning that, on the surface, sounds routine. But the timing is what's making people pause. Because this didn't come out of nowhere. The FBI doesn't just issue warnings randomly. There's always context. There's always something building behind the scenes. Patterns, signals, movements, things the public doesn't fully see yet. And that's where things start to get interesting. The warning itself, it's being framed carefully, measured language, no panic, no urgency in tone. But when you listen closely, it's not about what's being said. It's about what isn't. And that's exactly why people are starting to ask questions. Why now? Why this specific moment? Because over the past few days, there's been a quiet buildup of events, small on their own, but when you connect them, they begin to form a pattern. Not a clear one, not yet, but enough to make agencies like the FBI start paying attention publicly. And when something moves from internal awareness to public warning, that usually means one thing. It's no longer something they can keep contained behind closed doors. Now, here's where it gets even more interesting. This isn't the first time we've seen this kind of communication style. If you go back to previous situations, moments before major developments, the early signals often looked exactly like this. Controlled messaging, limited detail, but just enough to let people know something is unfolding. And at first, most people ignore it because it doesn't feel urgent yet. There's no clear event, no headline that forces everyone to stop and look. Just a warning, sitting there, waiting to be understood. But the people who follow these patterns closely, analysts, observers, even some officials, they tend to react differently. They don't just look at the words. They look at the timing, the context, and what else is happening around it. And right now, there's a lot happening around it, quietly. You have increased conversations around security concerns in multiple states. You have shifts in how certain situations are being handled at a local level. And then suddenly, the FBI steps in. Not with full details, but with enough to signal that this isn't something isolated. That's the key word here, isolated. Because when something is isolated, it stays local. It doesn't need a federal level voice. But when it starts to connect, when multiple points begin to align, that's when agencies like the FBI move into the picture. And they don't do that lightly. So again, the question comes back, why now? What changed between last week and this moment? Because something did. Something crossed a threshold. And even though we don't have the full picture yet, the reaction itself is part of the story. The fact that a warning was issued publicly means there's already enough concern internally to justify it. That alone tells you this isn't random. Now, to be clear, this doesn't mean something dramatic is about to happen tomorrow. That's not how these situations usually unfold. It's rarely instant. It's gradual. It builds. And most people only recognize it after it's already developed into something bigger. But right now, we're in that early phase, the part where signals start appearing, but the full meaning isn't clear yet. And this is where attention matters. Because moments like this don't come with full explanations. They come with fragments, clues, warnings that seem vague until suddenly they're not. So when the FBI says something, even carefully, even quietly, it's worth paying attention, not because of fear, but because of pattern. Because history has shown that these early signals often matter more than the headlines that come later. And right now, the signal is there. A warning has been issued. The question is, what exactly are we being prepared for? If this was just a routine warning, most people wouldn't even notice it. It would pass like so many others, mentioned briefly, then buried under the next news cycle. But that's not what's happening here. There's a different kind of attention building around this one, not explosive, but steady. And that usually means one thing. People sense that there's more beneath the surface. Because when you start looking beyond the headline, the environment around this warning begins to shift. You start to see small adjustments, not dramatic enough to trend, but noticeable if you're paying close attention. Local agencies becoming slightly more alert. Discussions quietly increasing in certain regions. Subtle changes in how situations are being handled. None of this is being presented as a crisis, but it doesn't feel completely normal either. And that gray area, that space between nothing and something, is exactly where these kinds of developments begin. Now, here's the part that really stands out. When the FBI issues a warning like this, it's rarely based on a single factor. It's usually the result of multiple signals coming together: intelligence, observations, patterns of behavior, all pointing in a direction that isn't fully clear yet, but concerning enough to acknowledge publicly. Think of it like this. Individually, each signal might not mean much, but together they start forming a picture. And right now, it seems like that picture is starting to take shape, but not in a way that's easy to explain, at least not yet. That's why the messaging feels so controlled, because when agencies don't have a complete picture, they don't overcommit. They don't give specifics too early. Instead, they create awareness without triggering panic. And that's exactly what we're seeing. A warning that exists, but without full detail. A message that signals concern, but stops short of defining the threat. And for a lot of people, that's where the discomfort comes in, because uncertainty is harder to process than clear information. If you're told exactly what's happening, you can react, you can understand it, you can categorize it. But when you're given partial information, just enough to know something is off, but not enough to fully understand it, your mind starts trying to fill in the gaps. And that's what's happening right now across the US. People aren't reacting to the warning itself as much as they're reacting to what it might mean. And when that starts happening, attention increases. Not all at once, not explosively, but gradually. Now let's talk about timing again, because this is where things start to connect. This warning didn't come during a quiet period. It came at a time when multiple conversations were already happening in the background. Conversations about security, about stability, about things that don't always make headlines but are always present beneath the surface. And when you layer a federal warning on top of that, it amplifies everything, even if the warning itself is vague, because now those existing concerns feel more real, more immediate, more connected. And that's where the shift happens, not in the event itself, but in how people perceive it. Now, here's something that often gets overlooked. Warnings like this aren't just about the public. They're also signals to other agencies, to local authorities, to systems that operate across different levels. It's a way of aligning awareness, making sure that everyone is paying attention to the same general direction, even if the details aren't fully shared. So when the FBI speaks, it's not just one message. It's multiple layers of communication happening at once. And that's why even a simple warning can carry so much weight, because it's not simple at all. It's strategic, measured, intentional. Now, does that mean something major is about to happen? Not necessarily. But it does mean that something has reached a point where it can no longer be ignored internally. And once that line is crossed, once something moves from internal concern to public awareness, the situation changes, even if nothing visible has happened yet. That's the part most people miss. They wait for a clear event, a headline, a moment that confirms everything. But by then, the early signals are already behind us. And right now, we're still in that early phase. The part where things are forming, but not fully revealed. The part where awareness matters more than reaction. Because once something becomes obvious, it's no longer early. It's already happening. So the real question isn't just what did the FBI say? It's what are they seeing that led them to say anything at all? Because whatever that is, it's already in motion. We just don't see the full shape of it yet. At this point, it's no longer just about the warning. It's about what comes next. Because once something reaches this stage, where awareness has been raised, where attention has shifted, the situation begins to evolve in a different way. Not necessarily faster, but more visible. And that's where we are now, right on the edge of something that hasn't fully revealed itself yet. Now, historically, moments like this follow a pattern. Not always the same outcome, not always the same scale, but the structure, the way things unfold, tends to repeat. It starts quietly, small signals, limited communication, a sense that something is happening but without clear definition. Then comes the second phase, the one we're entering now: increased attention, more discussion, more people starting to connect the dots, even if the dots themselves are still unclear. And then eventually, the third phase, clarity. That's when everything becomes obvious, when the situation either resolves or escalates into something undeniable. But here's the key. By the time clarity arrives, the early advantage is gone, because the people who understood the signals early were already paying attention. And right now, this feels like one of those moments where attention matters, not panic, not overreaction, just awareness. Because whatever prompted this warning hasn't disappeared. It hasn't been resolved overnight. If anything, it's still developing, still moving beneath the surface. And that's why the timing of what happens next becomes so important. Will there be more updates? Will other agencies start speaking out? Will this remain a quiet signal or turn into something bigger? Those are the questions people are starting to ask, and you can already see it, not in headlines, but in behavior. More people watching closely, more conversations starting to shift. More curiosity building around something that still doesn't have a clear name. That's how these moments grow, not through a single event, but through a gradual increase in attention until suddenly everyone is looking at the same thing at once. And when that happens, it feels like it came out of nowhere, but it didn't. It was building the entire time. Now, here's where things get even more interesting, because in situations like this, there are usually two possible directions. The first is that everything stabilizes. The warning serves its purpose. Awareness increases. Whatever risk existed is managed, contained, or fades away without becoming something major. And in that case, most people move on quickly. It becomes just another moment that passed without incident. But the second possibility is different. That's when the warning turns out to be an early signal of something that continues to grow. Not instantly, not explosively, but steadily. Until it reaches a point where it can no longer stay in the background. And that's when it becomes a headline, a real one. The kind that forces everyone to stop and pay attention. And the truth is, right now, we don't know which direction this will go. And that uncertainty, that space between maybe nothing and maybe something, is exactly what keeps people watching. Because humans are wired to look for patterns, to anticipate what's coming next, to try and understand signals before they fully form into events. And that's why this moment feels different to so many people. It's not just the warning itself, it's the feeling that something is still unfolding, something that hasn't reached its final form yet. And whether that turns into something significant or fades quietly into the background will depend on what happens next. Not just from agencies, but from the situation itself. Because once something starts moving in this way, it rarely stays completely still. It either settles or it builds. And right now, we're in that space where it could go either way, which is why people are watching more closely, listening more carefully, trying to understand what this moment actually means before it becomes obvious. Because once it's obvious, it's already too late to ask questions. The answers are already in front of you. But right now, we're still in the phase where questions matter more than answers. And the biggest one is still the simplest. What exactly are we witnessing the beginning of?